Shelby Miller is back on a baseball field. That's not a figure of speech, it's a fact. The Chicago Cubs have officially sent the pitcher to the Iowa Cubs at AAA, beginning a rehab assignment that could ultimately lead to Miller returning to Chicago's bullpen before the end of the 2026 regular season. The 35-year-old has not appeared in an official game since undergoing right elbow surgery in Arizona, and this move represents the first concrete confirmation that the front office sees a realistic path for him to rejoin the 26-man roster before the October push. The operational details matter just as much as the announcement itself. Miller signed a 2-year contract with the Cubs last winter, a deal structured with the understanding that the first half of the contract would be consumed by his surgical recovery. No one inside the front office expected in March that he would step onto a competitive mound before September. The rehab assignment in Iowa marks that exact turning point. There are roughly 2 months left in the regular season, enough time, according to the medical staff, for Miller to build up rehab innings and regain his pitching rhythm before a potential promotion. Craig Counsell was cautious when discussing the situation with Marquee Sports Network, avoiding the temptation to create expectations, but confirming that the timeline has exceeded the internal projections established during spring training. According to sources close to the team's medical department, the medical plan calls for somewhere between 6 and 8 controlled appearances in Iowa before any serious consideration of a promotion, with a pitch limit gradually increasing with each outing, starting around 15 pitches and gradually climbing toward a workload of approximately 25 to 30 pitches, a level considered safe for a bullpen reliever heading into October. I received this information before any official note began circulating through the major outlets, and what caught my attention wasn't the rehab itself. That was expected to happen at some point, but the timing. The Cubs front office rarely moves a bullpen piece into a rehab assignment without first calculating the impact on the 40-man roster and the financial flexibility they'll have in September. When I connected this move with the recent additions of Kevin Gausman, Clay Holmes, and Ryan Zeferjahn, it became clear that Jed Hoyer is building a layered playoff pitching staff, and Miller is the insurance layer that nobody was publicly counting on. This isn't an accident. This is front office planning at its most surgical. To understand the weight of this decision, you have to look at the bigger picture the front office has been building during the final weeks surrounding the trade deadline. The Cubs aggressively pursued Kevin Gausman and Clay Holmes, 2 veteran pitchers, and also secured Ryan Zeferjahn, an elite fastball reliever, along with Braxton Garrett to strengthen their starting options. The front office also pursued Tarik Skubal, only to see the pitcher sent to the Los Angeles Dodgers, a reminder that not every negotiation ends the way Northside fans would like. The injury crisis in the rotation, involving Justin Steele, Matthew Boyd, Jameson Taillon, Ben Brown, and others, forced Hoyer to attack the market on multiple fronts at the same time, and Miller's early return fits perfectly into that effort to protect the pitching staff for October. It's also important to remember the failed attempt to acquire Sandy Alcantara and the inquiries involving Joe Ryan, Freddie Peralta, and Robbie Ray throughout the summer, negotiations that never advanced, but that revealed a front office willing to explore every possible avenue before the trade deadline. Every one of those attempts, even the ones that never became deals, helped map out the market's true appetite for impact pitchers. Information Hoyer undoubtedly used to calibrate what he paid for Gausman, Holmes, and Zeferjahn in the final hours of the deadline. From a financial standpoint, the engineering behind this season is complicated. The Cubs' competitive payroll for 2026 is projected to be around $218 million, putting them within range of the first luxury tax threshold, which is set at roughly $241 million this cycle. Miller's 2-year contract, with a total estimated value of $8.5 million, was intentionally structured with incentives based on innings pitched during the second half of the deal, a structure that protects the club's cash flow if the recovery takes longer than expected, but that now, with his accelerated return, is beginning to generate real on-field value earlier than anticipated. Add the commitments already made to Gausman, Holmes, and Zeferjahn, and the front office's room to maneuver in September becomes increasingly narrow, requiring surgical decisions over who occupies each of the 26 active roster spots. It's worth remembering that exceeding the first luxury tax threshold isn't simply a matter of paying a fine. The club can lose draft position and face escalating penalties if it becomes a repeat offender in subsequent years, which helps explain why Hoyer would rather address bullpen depth with a low-cost contract like Miller's than pursue a market addition carrying a double-digit million-dollar salary down the stretch. You have to accept one thing about October baseball. There is no room for sentimentality. You can root for the feel-good story of Shelby Miller overcoming major surgery and returning in time for the playoffs, but the front office isn't going to put his name on the roster out of affection. If Miller doesn't show in Iowa that his four-seam fastball still rises at the top of the zone and that his splitter in the 80-mile-per-hour range still creates real discomfort for opposing hitters, he stays off the roster. Simple as that. The front office operates on data, not emotional narratives, and you, Northside fans, need to understand that every October roster spot is a probability-based decision, not a reward for successfully completing a comeback story. The market interpreted Miller's assignment to AAA as a quiet sign of confidence from the front office, the kind of move that doesn't generate headlines but fuels internal conversations among agents and other front offices about the true depth of the Cubs bullpen heading into October. Team reporters such as Jesse Rogers had already been indicating that the organization viewed Miller as a high-risk, high-reward piece for the final stretch of the season. Meanwhile, direct rivals in the National League wildcard race are closely monitoring any sign of additional bullpen reinforcement in Chicago, aware that an experienced reliever like Miller, even in limited doses, can change the calculation of high-leverage innings in September matchups. Ken Rosenthal and Bob Nightingale, two of the most respected names in national baseball coverage, had already been describing the Cubs bullpen as one of the most reinforced units in the National League following the trade deadline, and Miller's quiet addition as a rehab option only strengthens that perception among rival executives keeping a close eye on the north side. It's worth asking what the Cubs left on the table and what remains within the front office's reach. Losing Skubal to the Dodgers closed the door on the ace-level upgrade part of the fan base was hoping for, but it did not eliminate the short-term options. Hoyer can still revisit the waiver market in August, a path that has historically been used to add bullpen depth without giving up top prospects. Veteran relievers released by non-contending teams often become available during this period, and the organization has already shown, with the moves for Holmes and Zephyrjon, that it is willing to pay a premium for bullpen certainty. The question is whether Miller's return reduces that need or simply adds another layer of insurance to a group that was already aggressively reinforced at the trade deadline. Another avenue the front office can keep in its back pocket is the post-deadline trade market, limited to players who clear waivers without being claimed, a route that has historically produced middle-inning relievers at minimal prospect cost, and one Hoyer has used in previous competitive cycles to patch late-season bullpen holes. If I were sitting in the general manager's chair, I would handle Miller's situation with a strict internal timetable, but I would not announce a promotion date. I would give him at least 4 to 5 rehab appearances in Iowa before making any decision, monitoring fastball velocity, splitter spin rate, and, most importantly, the recovery time between appearances, the real test for a post-surgery elbow. I would also keep an alternative route open through the waiver market, because betting all of your October bullpen depth on a single 35-year-old pitcher coming off surgery is a level of risk no competent front office should accept without a concrete and financially viable plan B. The impact of this move also reverberates through the minor league system. Iowa, at AAA, now has a veteran with an established work routine, something that can benefit young pitchers in the system who share the bullpen with him, allowing them to learn physical preparation routines and repertoire mechanics. In Tennessee, at AA, the effect is indirect but real. Any eventual promotion of Miller to the major league roster creates logistical room throughout the pitching depth chain, something Hoyer has historically used to accelerate the exposure of developing bullpen prospects. It is not an exaggeration to say that an apparently isolated decision involving a veteran reliever can quietly reshape the flow of promotions throughout the Cubs' entire minor league system. Bullpen prospects who are currently sharing the clubhouse with Miller in Iowa gain direct access to the preparation routine of a pitcher who has already spent time with two different organizations in the major leagues, a type of informal mentorship that the front office values almost as much as the velocity numbers recorded by TrackMan during each bullpen session. To close this case with the facts consolidated, Shelby Miller has been sent to the Iowa Cubs for a rehab assignment, marking his first game appearance since undergoing right elbow surgery. The 2-year contract he signed last winter already anticipated this extended recovery scenario, but the current timeline is ahead of the front office's original projections. The move comes alongside the additions of Gausman, Holmes, Zephyrjohn, and Garrett, and takes place against the backdrop of an injury crisis affecting key members of the starting rotation. There are roughly 2 months remaining in the regular season for Miller to prove on the field that he deserves one of the 26 active roster spots heading into the playoffs. As an analyst, I see this move as a front office determined to extract value from every inch of the roster, even in cases involving extremely high medical risk. As a fan, I'll admit that the idea of seeing Miller, with his uncomfortable arm slot for opposing hitters, taking high-leverage innings alongside Zephyrjohn in late October is a scenario that gets the heart of any Northside fan racing. But I remain committed to the same promise I've made to you. I'm not going to sell hope without data. I'll follow every one of Miller's appearances in Iowa with the same analytical discipline I use to evaluate a $100 million signing, because that is exactly the kind of rigor that separates an informed fan base from a fan base held hostage by blind optimism. And now I'll ask you directly, if Miller comes back in September pitching at the same level he showed before surgery, would you trust him in a crucial October moment, knowing his recent medical history, or would you rather see the front office prioritize a pitcher with less physical risk, even if that means less horsepower in the arm? Think about that before you answer, because that is exactly the decision Craig Counsell and Jed Hoyer will have to make under pressure in just a few weeks.